I'm a Touhou fan. More than one, actually. I've bought a Reimu and a Mima coffee mug to go along with, since the PC98 games are actually my favorite series of games. I never cared much for the Windows games aside from the 6th embodiment of Scarlet Devil or the 7th, Perfect Cherry Blossom. I'm also an introvert, but honestly, I wouldn't call myself a weeaboo, even though I've watched the unofficial Touhou anime. Either way, that's not what I'm here to talk about. I decided to look around on forums to see if there actually were any ROM hacks for the first 5 Touhou games. I searched earlier with no real luck. Maybe they were hosted on other sites or Google didn't pick them up. But as I checked later, I found a forum leading to someone saying that the ROM of Touhou 5 they took off a physical copy of the game crashed the PC when trying to run it through the emulator Neko project. Now this is in the context of a Windows PC, not the actual Japanese PC98 itself they used to pull the ROM off. When their PC would start up, it would flash a red and then start up normally. They didn't know what to do, so they posted the ROM on the forum to see if anyone else could figure it out. Most people replied to them saying their computer may be too old to run it, which didn't make any sense. So I replied on the forum that I'll give it a look and see if it works on my system. I used the newer version of Neko Project and it ran fine. Except for the fact that the game was mostly in English and it didn't have the official English patch watermark underneath the giant mystic square. The normal image below shows an edit of the normal Japanese patch without the watermark. The questionable part of this was that if it were on a Japanese PC98 disc, it couldn't have been in English. But I had to go eat lunch, so I went and did that first. I come back to my computer. No crash, nothing. However, the title screen did look different. For one, Reimu's eyes were closed and shedding tears. There was no quit button either. However, the change that really caught my eye at the first sight was the red and black yin-yang orb. Now, if this was just some guy's ROM hack, and you've played the first game in the series, a red and black yin-yang orb actually isn't that strange to begin with. A red and black yin-yang orb actually shows up as the first boss of the game, highly responsive to prayers, named Shingyoku. The missing quit button, however, I tried to select it, but with no luck. I was running it in Neko Project, so I could close it at any time. But I digress. It was time for me to actually play the game. I hit start and picked Yuka. Stage 1 was normal, as it should be. I had put the difficulty on hard, yet I've never truly beaten this game, and I was shooting enemies and dodging projectiles. It was Mystic Square. I got up to the first boss, Sarah. She said the first lines of dialogue she would normally say, but then I saw this. And it cuts to a screenshot of Sarah with black eyes saying, "Do you think this is a joke?" And Yuka, normal, saying, "Anyway, you're in my way." Sarah here would normally have a smug expression and smile here. Normal styled eyes in pink as well. Though this ROM, her eyes were entirely empty black. There was nothing. And she had a grin I had never seen on Sarah's face before. That smile was, oh boy. I got a bit frightened for seeing this. One other thing to note is that Sarah usually says, "That's because I'm supposed to be here." Not this. I was also too in shock from the face and line to notice, until the time of writing this, that she had blood on her arm. Not hyper-realistic blood, but the coloring implied that it was blood. Yuka said her usual response of killing Sarah instantly, and Sarah said the same line about taunting Yuka using the normal portrait. Though, Yuka's response meant business when she said, "I'll kill you instantly." Sarah's bullet patterns were normal, but one thing was different. She really did die in one hit. Yuka's dialogue came up, and then when I pressed Z to advance, the next dialogue box, and it shows a screenshot of like a red glitched out Sarah, again with a blacked out eyes, an even worse grin, speaking gibberish, with Yuka saying, "Oops, that ended up taking a long time." Okay, what the fuck? I don't even know where to begin with this. Sarah's color palette was entirely red and her eyes went black. Parts of her sprite were missing as well. The dialogue here was usually about Sarah, complaining that Yuka didn't kill her instantly. But here, the text seemed to be there, but had layers of other text over it. I didn't try to decipher exactly the other layers of text were, because I more or less just wanted to move on. That image, though, that's something that'll haunt me for quite a bit. After trying to get Sarah's red, eyeless face out of my mind, I went on to stage 2. I noticed that it was similar. Everything was pretty much the same in terms of stage 2. Again, I shot enemies, dodged bullets, and was playing Mystic Square. But when I saw Louise, the stage 2 boss, come up, the dialogue appeared. Louise looked untouched, and it shows a screenshot of Louise perfectly fine, eyes closed, saying, "Please leave, Shinki's gone mad." And then Ryuka responds with, "What should I do? This is the first contact." A pattern I had began to notice at this point was that Yuka's dialogue never changed. She said the same lines as she would in the game, but another thing I quickly noticed was that there was an underlying story element to this ROM hack. Shinki's gone mad. Louise seemed to be warning Yuka of going further, and she looked completely untouched compared to Sarah. After this dialogue, Louise would use her normal bullet patterns on hard mode, but they were super slow, like she was giving Yuka a second chance to go back. I started to feel bad. Louise was probably telling not just Yuka, but possibly as many people as she could to escape Makai. Normally in the game's plot, the demons of Makai were leaving because they wanted to torture Gensokyo. It was clear here that wasn't the case. Instead, they were escaping from Shinki's torment. I'm sorry, Louise, but I have to kill you to move on to the next stage. Forgive me. I made my way onto stage 3. This time, there was no music. It was dead silent. There were no enemies either. The background stayed the same, but there was nothing here. I held down the Z key to fire shots so that I could get rid of the creepy lack of sound, but now the game was really pulling on my heartstrings with what I saw next. Usually this exchange would be something of Alice trying to hush Yuka and shoo her away from Makai. And it shows, and we've got a screenshot of Alice bleeding out of her left eye. Literally, only her left eye is bleeding. Gibberish for her dialogue. And again, Yuka, completely normal and untouched, responding with, "That's right," and a heart, as per her normal dialogue in Mystic Square. The first thing I noticed about her was that she was bleeding from the eyes, her left more so than her right. If this was Shinki's doing, God, what happened to her? She must have had something done to her that caused her to do this, and I doubt those bleeding eyes were Alice's only wounds. I went past the dialogue screen, and Alice didn't do anything. at all. She wasn't moving or sending bullets my way. It seemed through this she was implying she wanted to die. I moved in several different directions to see if she would move eventually, but she didn't. She stood there, waiting for me to kill her. I actually somewhat started to tear up at this sight. Alice, Shinki's adoptive daughter, and Fannin, of course, had been wounded, and she wanted me to kill her for mercy's sake. I actually said in a whisper, "Remember, I was hesitant to do this," and pressed the Z button. I heard a delayed beep, and she had died normally. No dialogue after that. A tear rolled down my cheek as I pressed Z to go to the score screen and onto the next stage. Stage 4 was no different from Stage 3. The silence and lack of enemies were there. I again held down the Z button to get rid of that silence. This ROM hack story was actually quite intriguing. I have to give some respect to the dev for this one. Stage 4. I got to Yuki and Mai. No dialogue occurred, and they sent an unbeatable bullet pattern towards me, taking all of my lives and taking all of my continues. I got to the high score screen, and after moving past it, this final image was shown to me. And it shows an image of Shinki. No dialogue, no Yuka, literally just Shinki. In a black background, smiling. Black eyes, but white irises. No pupils. A slowed down version of End of the World's End played along with this image as soon as it showed up. For at least 10 seconds, Shinki seemed to be staring right at me with cold eyes, black sclera, and white rings for the irises. This was especially unnerving. Louise wasn't lying. Shinki did go insane. Her smile wasn't that of the warm smile she normally had on, but the smile of a cold-blooded murderer. She probably had been tormenting Makai for quite a while. No wonder things were getting worse the farther I got in the game. Sarah was Makai's gatekeeper, of course. She'd be the one of the darker ones first. Shinki probably didn't even think about Louise when tormenting Makai, so Louise was able to escape. And Alice. She must have been abused by her. The glitch layered text was most likely because some sort of curse put on them to keep them from warning people about Shinki. Similar to Metal Gear Solid's Lali Lule Lo. Honestly, I don't know, and I don't want to know. After the screen went to full black, Neko Project went into a non-responding state and crashed. At that point, I DM'd the forum user that it would have been better that their PC crashed than for them to witness the horrors of the ROM that the ROM actually had in store. And there we actually have a pretty good Touhou creepypasta. Not just a normal creepypasta, a Touhou creepypasta, which is honestly something you don't see too often, especially when it comes to the PC-98 games, because the PC-98 games tend to get overshadowed by a lot of the modern era games, like the Windows games. And especially when it comes to Embodiment of Scarlet Devil and Perfect Cherry Blossom. Those two are the most, popular Touhou games. Which, they're not bad games, but they're obviously not the best. Again, they're not bad games, but they're not the best. Embodiment of Scarlet Devil especially. But honestly, seeing something like this for a PC-98 Touhou game, which, some of which I have actually played on this channel. But I've yet to play Mystic Square on this channel. Don't worry, I'll get to that soon. But honestly, as far as I read, there are very little to no cliches. Yes, hyper-realistic eyes were mentioned, but it was only a mention. None of the characters had the hyper-realistic eyes, none of that. But one of the few cliches I saw were, some of the cliches were, Sarah the Stage 1 boss having completely blacked out eyes and an evil grin, and upon beating her, she went from normal, except minus that creepy smile and those blacked out eyes, to a completely red character sprite with good chunks of it missing, those blacked out eyes still remaining intact, and an even creepier smile. That's one of the few cliches. And then we got to another cliche is stages 3 and 4 having no music when stages 1 and 2, as well as the bosses, had the music. Fairly certain that all the music was intact up to that point. But then when we got to stages 3 and 4, there was no music at all. That's another cliche. And another mini cliche, the jumbled up text for the bosses and dialogue. Completely jumbled text, that's another cliche, but honestly, I'll get to what I think about the cliches here in a bit. And then Alice actually wanting the player to actually kill her, and the player being heartbroken. I 100% understand that they would be heartbroken, because you have to remember, back in Mystic Square, Alice was just a little child back then. Alice was a little child. And coming from someone who was abused growing up, this part, when I reading this part, you could hear my voice, shake a little. It was, yeah, because I could actually, feel what Alice is going through. So yeah, it broke my heart reading this, and I honestly just couldn't, I'm looking at the screenshot right now, and it's just sad. But yeah, Alice, on top of that, didn't fight back or anything. She literally just asked to be killed. It was really sad. Really sad. And then when stage 4 came up, but yeah, that part with Alice, that pulled at my heartstrings when I read that. And for those who don't know, Alice is actually one of my favorite characters. So seeing that made it much worse. So not only was it implied that Shinki abused Alice, which is something I personally did go through for years growing up. It happened to one of my favorite characters. Like, that's kind of sad. That's just awful to just think about. And then when we got to, again, stage 4, again, there was no music, but it turned out to be completely unbeatable. Now, stage 4 of Mystic Square is hard for sure. Trust me, it's hard. But not unbeatable normally, so this is kind of like a pseudo cliche, but I'm technically gonna count it as one because, yeah, it's not the first time I've seen creepypastas include like unbeatable stages or whatever, which is why I'm kind of saying it's like a pseudo cliche. And then we cut to another cliche, was Shinki, the final boss for Mystic Square, like Alice's mom, the final boss. The image of her literally in just a black void with that creepy smile and those eyes, like, with her theme playing in the background, by the way. Completely slowed. Just it's another cliche. Like, yeah, and then just nothing afterwards. It was just, wow. Now, what do I think of the creepypasta overall? Well, yes, it was cliched. The cliches, honestly, to me, were actually done pretty well. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a Touhou fan and I really love the PC-98 games, Mystic Square included. But they were actually done pretty well. And, like, again, when it came to the part with Alice, like, when it was implied that Shinki abused her, like, again, I'll reiterate, I could feel, like, I knew what Alice was most likely going through from Shinki, and honestly, that was actually done exceedingly well, because again, I started this channel almost 10 years ago because I was abused growing up. Not from my mom, of course, but by her boyfriend at the time. Like, we were all abused back then. And I made this channel to, like, cope with it. And there were times, like, I felt completely hopeless. And, like, I just couldn't deal with it, which is why I made this channel back then. So, again, you know a cliche is done right when you lived through what a character actually was implied to go through. So, this creepypasta was cliched, but it was cliched in a good way, which is honestly something you don't see too often. Now, would I recommend you give this creepypasta a try yourself? Absolutely. It's definitely a damn good read. Not to mention, the game's soundtrack itself as well is also really good. It's also really good. It's available on Spotify. It's available on Spotify under the Accus Untouched Score Volume 4. I listen to it quite often, like when I record like a Master Duel video or whatever. I'll often listen to Touhou music, and the vast majority of my favorite Touhou music is from the PC98 games. Mystic Square, Lotus Land Story, of course, and Phantasmagoria of Dim Dream, which is the gameplay used in the gameplay. But yeah, I do recommend giving this creepypasta a read yourself. Listening to the game's soundtrack on like Spotify, it's on YouTube for sure as well. And playing like the game itself, not like the creepypasta quote unquote ROM hack version, but like the actual game itself. It's honestly it's a good game, like especially for like an old Japanese computer game back in 1999. Like the game came out the year I was born, and it's a really good game. Like again, one of my top 5 favorites overall. So yeah, give this creepypasta a read. Give the game's soundtrack a listen, and give the game a play. It's honestly a really good time. I'm honestly surprised I read a creepypasta that was cliched, but actually was really good despite the cliches. Which again, we're done right, to me, honestly. And yeah, I'm still debating on what image I want to use for the thumbnail. Probably the Shinki image, because it honestly would be best fit, but at the same time, I also kind of want to use like the red sprite of Sarah, that image. I kind of want to use that as well, but I mean, I'll think about it. But yeah, anyways, let me know what you thought of this creepypasta. Let me know what creepypasta I should read next. And I know I said I was going to do this like twice a month, but honestly, I feel like I might do this like once a week maybe, because I'm honestly growing a liking to reading creepypastas, and this is the second one I've read over the past week. Or I might just read a creepypasta just whenever I feel like it would be good for a video. But yeah, this has been the Black Square Touhou 5 creepypasta. And I'm out.